Everyone for joining us for this session. I'm pleased to introduce two additional panelists. We have James Cutler from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation and Jackie Core from Social Finance. And I'll let them begin by introducing themselves, and then we'll dive into the learnings from their experience of implementing an impact investing program with an external partner. James, we'll start with you.
Hi everyone, great to join you virtually today. I am James Cutler, the Senior Investment Officer for the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. I'm responsible for helping lead both our traditional and impact investment program at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation.
Hello everybody, I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person in Tennessee. I was hoping to do so. I am Jackie Core, Vice President for Social Investments for Social Finance. We are a impact finance and advisory not-for-profit organization that works with impact investors to structure impact-first investment products that drive more capital into underserved communities and sectors. I work out of our San Francisco office, and we are headquartered in Boston, and we also have an office in Austin, Texas.
Great, thank you both. So with that, we'll get started. James, if I can start with you, can we start with the basics? And can you please describe to the audience essentially the platform or the program that you've put into place with the partnership with Social Finance?
Yes, thanks, Laura. We did a recoverable grant pilot with Social Finance, and what we were piloting is two main things. The first was bringing opportunities or impact-first opportunities to our donors. I like to use the analogy that historically, our investment offerings have been a one-way street. Donors could recommend an impact investment to be made out of their DAF, and we would execute that on their behalf, but we were not guiding them or leading them or offering them any impact investments. We found increasingly that our donors said, well, can you help me? How do I get started? Where should I look? How do I use my DAF for more impact? So the first thing we were piloting was how do we source, diligence, package, and bring options to our donors. The second thing we were piloting is using recoverable grants as that structure. We had done equity investments, we had done debt investments, we even had a few recoverable grants on our books, but we found that we weren't really refined in what a recoverable grant is, how do we define it, how do we use it, how do we account for it, what's the legal treatment we should be thinking of. And the simple question, when someone says I made a debt or equity investment, we all know what they're talking about. If someone said I made a recoverable grant, nobody knows what you're talking about, or three people will have three different thoughts on what that means or what that looks like. So we wanted to pilot those two things. How do we bring opportunities to our donors? And second, how do we kind of really refine the use of recoverable grants within the organization?
Can you tell me a little bit about the strategic rationale behind both of those elements? Why did you think it was important to bring ready-made offerings to your donors? And also, why did you think it was important to be able to have a recoverable grants approach?
The first, I called it democratizing impact investments. We had some very high net worth, donors here in Silicon Valley. We're very lucky, who for many years were willing to pay for the cost of doing really customized impact investment opportunities. They brought ideas to us. They're willing to pay the fees for upfront due diligence and ongoing maintenance, and really help support our work in growing the impact investment capability. But what we found is after a couple of years of growth, it really plateaued with only those few select donors recommending impact investments. And that to really make it mainstream within the community foundation, we had to lower the cost, lower the due diligence cost, lower the time frame, lower the barriers, as well as just bring the opportunities to our donors, right? Let them kind of play t-ball. Where do I get started? Sourcing and finding your own impact investments is very difficult. When we met with Social Finance, they had done this research, and they confirmed our analysis that, hey, most donors at donor-advised funds and community foundations want to do impact-first investments, yet most sponsors don't offer them those opportunities. So it was a natural fit between SVCF and Social Finance to engage in this pilot. And we chose recoverable grants again as that place where we felt it was easy and comfortable for donors to get started. They're familiar with traditional grants. So we said, hey, you can make those same traditional grants to organizations that you really care about, but if they do make revenue, you might get paid back. And it was a very simple explanation to our donors instead of getting the complex, investment funds or equity investments, startups, complex debt structures. So it was really just a simple place and a simple message to explain to donors of, here's what this is. You make your normal grants. What if we could also get paid back and still have the impact that you need? And that's where those two pieces came from.
James is being a little bit too humble because the other rationale that we discussed at length as to why we used the recoverable grant structure as a starting point was the hypothesis that you had, James, from talking to a number of different CDFIs and impact-driven intermediaries, that having a recoverable grant structure would be the type of capital that would be most useful to the field, right? You were the one, James, always emphasizing the importance of having flexible capital, because remember now the context being there's a lot of CDFIs that are getting a lot of debt capital from corporations, from banks. The CDFIs are now having a moment, but they are still in short supply with regards to accessing flexible capital. And that was the intention, James, remember, about why you wanted to structure this as a recoverable grant, because we were hoping that this was going to be treated as net assets, especially by the CDFIs, that they could then further leverage with near market or at least concessionary capital from commercial lenders. So that was the other element.
What a wonderful marriage of donor appeal and true impact in the community. It's a great approach. So James, once you had identified that this was the route that you wanted to pursue, how did you decide to work with social finance? And can you tell me a little bit more about the internal challenges that you were looking to solve by partnering?
Yeah, we were lucky that social finance came to us, and they had some external funding. They said, we did this research. We're looking for partners to help us expand impact first capital and DAFs. Do you want to participate? And it took a little time internally to source through that. And do we want to be in a pilot program? And if somebody else is running it, should it work for us? And looking back over a year later, we're very glad we did it and found a great partnership in social finance. But some of the internal challenges, we're just thinking about what is it that we're doing? Why are we doing it? Very simple questions. Who's going to do the work? Right? Which department's going to do the work? And something as simple as, what is the workload on each department? We're going to engage in this pilot. Social finance is going to ask us questions. We're going to offer things to our donors. Well, what is each department going to do? What is our accounting department going to have to do? What is our IT department going to have to do? We launched a website. We did some transactions, right? All of a sudden, all these questions of what is the workload going to be on others, and can we support it? So that was the main internal challenge of just really understanding what was going to be involved. And the short answer of why we got this approved and why we moved forward is that we found that social finance could meet most of our needs. And they were there when we needed them to lead the process. They were able to support us when we took the lead, but we just found a great team, well-resourced, multiple levels of staff that were there to support us. And so they had the expertise, they knew the industry, they had done the research, and they had the support level that we needed. So that's why we ultimately decided to move forward with social finance as a partner.
Jackie, I know that you've worked with a couple of other donor advised fund sponsors. Is this kind of what you hear from those other partnerships as well? Are there other challenges that those sponsors are looking to solve with your team as well?
Yeah, there is a generally consistent theme that we've heard from community foundations and also commercially affiliated DAF sponsors around some of the friction that we and other organizations, including our compatriots who are on this panel, CapShift and Impact Assets, have been fantastic about addressing, because ultimately we're all in here for the same ultimate purpose, right? To deploy more impact-driven capital into communities to support populations that have hitherto had little access to traditional forms of capital. So we're all in the same game together. And so some of the challenges that James mentioned are things that we as an organization, as a not-for-profit mission-driven organization, are able to help with, because uniquely we ourselves have been beneficiaries of DAF capital into our impact first investment products, our career impact bonds, and our social impact bonds. So we have a unique perspective of having been recipients and then also helping to deploy capital. So we've been able to organize our services to meet the needs of community foundations such as Silicon Valley and other DAF sponsors in two ways. I frame it in the, I categorize it in sort of the buckets that James talked about, sort of the back end services and solutions where we act more like a mashup between outsourced staff and a general contractor in helping to draft recoverable grant agreements from templates that we have. We can help structure and vet impact first investment opportunities, we have standardized them all across the board because James, the portfolio we co-developed together had about a dozen underlying CDFIs and social enterprises across 4 thematic portfolios. So we helped vet and structure those recoverable grants, standardized impact first investment memos, and then the recoverable grant memos. That's all happening on the back end. And then front facing, we worked very closely with James' IT colleagues and marketing and donor relations colleagues to put together a donor facing website that donors could go to review and learn more about these impact first investment portfolios that align with Silicon Valley Community Foundation's place-based priorities that are focused on San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. So we worked with James's colleagues to first interview a cross-section of donors to identify what are the issue areas that are most interest to their donors, and then put together the portfolios, did the due diligence, and then put together descriptions that would resonate with donors. So we did, how I would just describe what we did was, feel free to interject, James, because this is intended to be sort of informal, hopefully, what I'm saying is accurate. We helped create, plug and play solutions for James and his colleagues. So we didn't just work with James, we also worked with his communications, marketing, donor relations, and IT colleagues as well.
James, can you tell me a little bit more about how that plug and play approach really allowed your team to move forward with this, particularly in an efficient manner? And were there any gaps that you identified that really still remained a challenge as you moved through the pilot program?
Yeah, what plug and play meant for us was that we could do what our team was already good at and had strengths and capacity to do, and we could partner when we either had weaknesses or just didn't have the capacity to execute on something. And that's what was really helpful, right? We are a community foundation. We wanted to start with the community. So we were able to identify where we want to invest, what types of organizations we want to invest in, what are our strategic issue areas, what partnerships we already have in place. And then from there, we can tag in and say, social finance, all right, here's what we got. Can you come help us? Let's round out this pipeline. What other organizations do you know about? Let's do diligence on the ones we already have partnerships with. So that's where the plug and play worked for us, was that it really allowed us our team members to do what we already knew and what we were good at, up to the point where we say, okay, we need help. Can you come in and fill this gap? And social finance had the team and the resources to come in and fill those gaps. The ongoing challenge, I would say, is going to be, which you can never fully outsource, is donor relationships. And then at the end of the day, a lot of this came down to personalized relationships and making sure you have we call it donor engagement, but whatever your philanthropic advising or donor engagement team is, has the capacity and the resources and the training and the knowledge to go out and engage your donors one-on-one and passionately talk about these things. We sent out an email and an e-blast, and we got some traction. But what we learned is what we need, and what really helps grow this program is those personalized relationships, and having the donor engagement team be able to really talk to donors, know what they care about, know what they're passionate about, and frame this in a way that makes sense, for that donor, and helps them bring along their individual philanthropic journeys. Each donor is at a very different place in their philanthropic journey. Some are just getting started. Some are very sophisticated. Some have their own staff and family offices or foundations. Some, this, is the only philanthropy that they make, and it's a big deal. And having the staff to know each donor and where they sit in that arc and how to interact with them is really helpful, and something that, we see as an ongoing challenge, and something that we need to build up our capacity on, and something that's not right for outsourcing.
And I'd agree with what James said. I mean, I don't know whether this makes you feel better or worse, James, but as you heard me say, this is a common challenge that we've encountered and heard from other DAF sponsors and community foundations that we're working with. And as a result, we've tried to put together talking points, cheat sheets, materials to support the equivalence of the donor engagement teams with other community foundations and DAF sponsors that we're working with. And at times, I don't recall whether our team worked directly with a couple of your donors, James, but with other community foundations and even commercial DAF sponsors, we've been asked to partner with their philanthropic advisors or donor engagement teams in workshops, in presentations, in one-on-one videos, because obviously nobody's meeting with anybody in person these days, with their selected donors to answer technical questions or to just give a picture of the landscape and to describe what the outcomes from these investments are. So we've been doing both a combination of supporting that effort, and also, partnering directly with the philanthropic services team. But as James indicated, this is an ongoing issue that would need to be addressed. Is fundamentally donor education and then supporting the philanthropic services team.
Can you both tell me a little bit about the pilot program and specifically the donor response? So, on those donors that you have been able to engage on a deeper level to really inspire them to move forward, how has that worked? And what are your overall thoughts on the success of your pilot program?
We didn't measure success in dollar amounts, so we raised about $2.2 million to be deployed in recoverable grants for COVID recovery. So for context, we launched this right in the heart of COVID, where our CEO had got out there and told our donors, you have to give 5% of your fund to COVID relief. You don't have to. We highly recommend you give 5% at least of your fund to COVID relief. And, we know you normally give, but we got to give more. We did a second round of those videos when the second wave hit. So we launched this right in the context of a real economic and hardship in our communities that we all felt, and no matter what community you're in. So we really tried to pivot the recoverable grant pilot to align with that and say, here's an additional way you can use your dollars, and that even if you gave away 5, 10, 15, 20, 50% of your donor advised fund, here's another tool in the toolkit where you can potentially hope to get some of it back, so you don't feel like you're completely draining your fund, and it's another way to enhance your philanthropy in this time. We found it successful because we got, one, a broad range of responses. We had people donate small dollar amounts. We had people donate large dollar amounts. We actually engaged a donor who had left us, and several years back had left us, and they heard about the pilot, and they actually they didn't even open up a donor advised fund. They just gave a straight gift to SVCF and said, we want to participate in this pilot. Just take it directly and deploy the capital. And they didn't open up another fund to recycle. They just gave it a straight out gift. So it was successful in reaching lots of different donors over different issue areas or different dollar amounts. But as we mentioned, the challenge was we didn't necessarily have the personal touch that we needed. So again, email responses and websites, and the in-personal only go so far. So we were happy with the response, but the lesson we learned was it really takes that personal touch to get a lot of these over the finish line and move interest into action. But we had no negative feedback, right? No one said this is a terrible idea, why did you email me? No one said that they disagreed with the project. Most people said, yeah, this sounds good. This sounds like something we do. We're glad you're supporting the communities more. We're glad you're offering us new opportunity sets. Maybe it's just not right for me at this time. So we were very happy with the outreach and got some additional dollars in the door as well.
But isn't this also, James, I don't know whether this pilot then led to, or to what extent, what role this pilot had in then shaping your current strategy around integrated capital and engaging your donors in co-investing with you all through your discretionary funds through this new set of tools that now you've sort of previewed and exposed them to in a larger scale, to co-invest with you in this integrated capital framework in ways that align with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation strategic place-based priorities in your two counties. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I know, Laura, that mean to circumvent your question and answer, but I just think prompting some of this might be interesting to the audience.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the goal of the pilot was two, one, to engage donors in that two-way street that we're bringing them opportunities, and two, develop a new tool, a new way to invest. It wasn't new, refine one way to invest or deploy capital. And I would say, yeah, on the first part, Jackie, that's exactly right. We primed our donors, we got them interested. They became aware of the opportunity that we could reach out to them and say, here's what's happening in our community, and here's how you can help. And here's how you can do it in ways that's more than just grant making. And so that's now an idea that our donors know about. And to be honest, a lot of donors who weren't even on, who were new donors who were not part of that, when we get on a call with them as they're joining the foundation, it's often the first question they ask is, yeah, we want to think about impact investing, but like, how do we do it? Where do we start? Do you have a list that we can use? Do you have a resource guide? And so what we had previously is called a giving guide. Someone said, I want to donate to early childhood education in San Mateo County, where we're located. We had a giving guide that, hey, here's the 25 organizations that we feel are highly impactful in early childhood in this community. But we didn't have that for investments. So this is what primed our donors to start thinking about that and asking for that. But I would say even probably the greater success was not our donors, but our internal staff. We've now primed our internal staff to start thinking about investments. That I can have as somebody on my grant making team, and our programs officer saying, thinking about, oh, well, we can give more than grants. There's the local YMCA that I'm giving a grant to, and they want to build a new building. We could give them a loan too. We could help them in other ways, and starting to prime internally to break down that silo between investments and grant making, and have our internal team start thinking about that. It's what we call integrated capital, but all of the DAF balance, all of our own endowment, how is it having impact? Could be a grant, could be an investment, could be a recoverable grant, could be any capital structure, but how is it going towards impact? And so we've started to prime our donors to expect that, and prime our internal staff to start thinking about that. And that's where we are in phase 2 with social finance, is building out that integrated capital structure and continuing our relationship. But that's been one major success as well, just getting that mindset shift a little bit.
With that approach, I think it's amazing. I think we are running a little light on time, but I think that we've covered so much of your experience. And James, you've really spoken to some of the lessons that you've learned throughout this, and really how you've transformed that into new initiatives and new ways of thinking at your organization. Because I expect that all the participants in this room are likely interested in doing something similar on their own, can you share any advice or recommendations for those that are just embarking on a journey and looking to potentially partner with external organizations as well?
Yeah, my advice is always start big, picture thinking, but end with small steps. And oftentimes, we find that we don't think big enough when we get started. Right, so we say things like, "Oh, our investment committee will never approve it," or "You can't do impact investing out of a DAF," or a PRI equals a low interest loan, and all of these things that we start with. And I just challenged myself and our team to just think big. Like, what is the ultimate goal here? The ultimate goal is that either our endowment or a DAF balance is used to create impact in our community. Well, how do we do that? Let's remove all of these internal barriers and silos and restrictions and say, what can we do with this money, and what does the community need? How does it get there? And recoverable grants was just one piece of that puzzle of moving money from our endowment or from the donor advised fund into the community. And as we're growing integrated capital, that philanthropic toolkit will continue to grow and grow and grow. We started small with a small pilot and one structure and one small group of donors. And we'll grow that over time. But what I say to get started is just think big. Think like literally, what is the purpose of your endowment? What is the purpose of a donor advised fund? What do you want to accomplish with it? And how would you get there? How would you move money to the places you want it to go? And that might be a recoverable grant, that might be a loan, that might be an investment. And just kind of start from the simple. I guess I said start big, but maybe I should say start simple. Sometimes we overcomplicate things, and just start simple. What is it that you want your money to do for you? And we want it to have impact in the communities that we serve, regardless of what the capital structure is. And that's where we started.
That's great advice. Jackie, anything from your perspective that you'd share for those embarking on a journey as well?
Yeah, just leveraging off the theme that James just ended with, start simple and then rounding it up. Silicon Valley used to be a bunch of orchards. So, I mean, to coin another phrase that James, was it Liz that coined it, start with some low hanging fruit, right? Things that are doable, that can, as you're trying to educate and inform your donors and your colleagues and your boards internally, start with some impact first investments that are pretty easy to do, that people can relate to, and that are aligned with your community foundation's strategic priorities, whether it's place-based or issue-focused, so that your board, I'm just taking some phrases from you from the earlier meeting, James, can then have a picture and say, oh, this is what you mean, and then they'll understand why this makes sense. So low-hanging fruit.
Great advice as well. Thank you both. This has been such an engaging conversation. I'm sure that everyone is going to take away immense value from it. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Laura, for the opportunity.
Thank you.